In the summer of 2020, a man named Trevor Milton stood at the peak of American capitalism, looking down at an empire worth $34 billion. He had convinced the world he'd desolved one of humanity's greatest challenges: how to move freight across continents without destroying the planet. His company, Nikola Motors, promised hydrogen-powered semi-trucks that would revolutionize transportation, end diesel's reign, and save the Earth itself. Wall Street believed him. General Motors believed him. Millions of ordinary investors believed him. They poured their savings, their retirement funds, their faith into a vision of the future that glittered like a desert mirage. But on a lonely stretch of road in Utah, years before the world would discover the truth, that future was rolling downhill on nothing but gravity and lies. This is the story of the greatest vehicular fraud in American history. A story about a truck that couldn't drive, a visionary who couldn't deliver, and an entire system that wanted to believe so desperately it stopped asking questions. Because when everyone profits from the illusion, who wants to be the one to break the spell? The year is 2014, and Trevor Milton is hungry. Not for food, but for something far more intoxicating: relevance. He's 32 years old, a college dropout from Utah with a string of failed ventures behind him, each one teaching him a crucial lesson about American business. It's not about what you build, it's about what you make people believe you're building. He's watched Elon Musk turn Tesla into a religion, seen tech founders become billionaires by selling dreams wrapped in keynote presentations and slick marketing videos. Milton understands something fundamental about the modern economy. In the age of disruption, the story matters more than the substance. At least long enough to get rich. So he founds Nikola Motors, naming it after Nikola Tesla. Because if you're going to steal credibility, steal it from a dead genius. His pitch is elegant in its simplicity. Hydrogen-powered semi-trucks that emit nothing but water vapor. Clean energy. American manufacturing. The death of diesel. It is a narrative perfectly engineered for a moment when venture capital is drowning in cash and desperately seeking the next Tesla, the next world-changing company to justify valuations that have detached from any recognizable reality. Milton isn't just selling trucks. He's selling salvation. But here's what nobody outside the company knows yet. Nikola Motors doesn't have working trucks. It doesn't have revolutionary battery technology. It doesn't have proprietary hydrogen fuel cells that surpass what scientists at NASA and Toyota have spent decades developing. What it has is Trevor Milton's gift for performance, a marketing budget that would make Hollywood jealous, and a willingness to cross lines that most entrepreneurs only nervously approach. Milton understands that in the startup world, especially in the electric vehicle space, everyone fakes it a little. Prototypes are held together with duct tape and hope. Demos are carefully choreographed to hide what doesn't work. This is accepted, even expected. But Milton is about to take this culture to its logical, criminal extreme. The company needs a proof of concept, something to show investors and partners that Nikola isn't just VIP. So they build the Nikola One, a semi-truck that looks absolutely magnificent in photographs. Gleaming chrome and aerodynamic curves, it appears to be pulled straight from a science fiction film about a better tomorrow. There's just one problem. It doesn't work. The hydrogen fuel cell system doesn't function. The battery technology isn't ready. The truck is, for all practical purposes, an extremely expensive sculpture. But Milton needs footage of this truck in action, needs video evidence that can be spliced into presentations and marketing materials, needs something that looks like proof. So, on a day when most people would admit defeat and go back to the drawing board, Trevor Milton and his team do something breathtaking in its audacity. They find a long, gradual slope in the Utah desert. They tow the Nikola One to the top of this hill using another vehicle. And then they film it rolling downhill, the camera positioned low and forward to hide the incline, creating the illusion of a truck driving under its own power across flat terrain. No engine running, no fuel cell generating electricity, just gravity doing what gravity does, pulling several tons of metal and lies toward the inevitable bottom. The video is beautiful. The truck glides silently across the frame, powerful and purposeful, exactly what investors want to see. Nikola releases this footage, and not once does anyone in the company clarify that what viewers are watching is a vehicle coasting downhill, not a functioning prototype. The distinction seems technical, almost philosophical. Does it matter how the truck moves, if it looks like it's moving? This is the question Trevor Milton has answered for himself, and his answer is no. What matters is the story, the belief, the momentum. Truth is just another variable to be optimized. Armed with this video and Trevor Milton's supernatural confidence, Nikola Motors begins its conquest of American capital. Milton is a mesmerizing pitchman, a man who can stand on stage and make the impossible sound inevitable. He doesn't speak in the cautious qualifiers of engineers and scientists. He deals in absolutes, in world-changing declarations, delivered with the certainty of a prophet. He tells investors that Nikola has technology that surpasses anything in the industry, that they've cracked problems that have stumped physicists for generations, that the trucks will be in production soon, that orders are flooding in, that the future is already here and it belongs to Nikola. And people believe him. They believe because they want to believe, because the alternative to climate catastrophe needs to exist, because everyone around them is also believing, and nobody wants to be the skeptic who misses the next Amazon. This is the psychology of bubbles, the mass delusion that grips markets when fear of missing out overwhelms fear of loss. Investors aren't really analyzing Nikola's technology or business model. They're analyzing each other, trying to guess how much higher the hype can carry the stock price before reality intervenes. It's not due diligence. It's game theory with retirement savings. By 2020, Nikola is ready for its rather than going public through the traditional IPO process, which would require extensive scrutiny and disclosure. The company merges with a special purpose acquisition company, ASPA. This financial instrument, sometimes called a blank check company, allows Nikola to go public with far less regulatory oversight than usual. It's a loophole dressed up as innovation, and it's perfect for a company built on smoke and mirrors. The merger is announced, and Wall Street loses its collective mind. The valuation explodes. Nikola Motors, a company that has never sold a single functioning truck, never generated meaningful revenue, never proven its technology works at scale, reaches a market capitalization of $34 billion. For perspective, that's more than Ford, a company that's been building actual trucks for over a century. Trevor Milton's personal stake in the company is suddenly worth billions. He appears on magazine covers, gives interviews about changing the world, posts videos of himself driving Nikola vehicles around his sprawling ranch. He's achieved the ultimate American dream, getting rich by convincing other people he's going to get rich. But the foundation is inside. Nikola engineers and employees are watching this coronation with growing unease. They know the trucks don't work. They know the technology is years behind what Milton is promising publicly. Some of them have raised concerns, quietly, internally, only to be marginalized or pushed out. This is another pattern in fraud. The truth-tellers are always there, witnessing the deception, often trying to stop it. But they're drowned out by the true believers and the willfully blind, by everyone who has too much invested in the lie to let facts destroy it. Meanwhile, Trevor Milton is on social media every day, pumping up the stock, making new claims, attacking skeptics, building a cult of personality around himself and his company. He promises partnerships and technological breakthroughs and production timelines that keep slipping into the future, like the Horizon Line. He announces deals with major corporations. General Motors agrees to take an 11% stake and help manufacture the trucks. Republic Services places an order. The validation from legitimate companies seems to prove the skeptics wrong. If GM believes in Nikola, how can it be a fraud? But then someone asks a dangerous question. A short-seller research firm called Hindenburg Research, known for investigating companies they believe are fraudulent, turns its attention to Nikola Motors. Short sellers have a mixed reputation. They profit when stock prices fall, which means they have an incentive to publish damaging information. But they also have an incentive to be right, because publishing false allegations carries severe legal consequences. Hindenburg begins digging, interviewing former employees, analyzing patents, scrutinizing every public claim Milton has made. And what they find is damning. On September 10th, 2020, Hindenburg publishes a report titled Nikola how to parlay an ocean of lies into a partnership with the largest auto OEM in America. It's not just critical, it's devastating, surgical in its precision. The report reveals that the Nikola One demo video, the one that helped launch the company into the stratosphere, showed a truck rolling downhill, not driving. It exposes that patents Nikola claimed as revolutionary were actually for products designed by other companies. It details statements from former employees who say the technology simply doesn't work as advertised, that prototypes were non-functional, that demonstrations for partners were carefully staged illusions. The report accuses Trevor Milton of being an intricate fraud built on dozens of lies. The reaction is instantaneous. Nikola's stock price collapses, losing billions in market value in hours. The financial media, which had celebrated Milton as a visionary just weeks earlier, now scrambles to understand how they missed this. Investors who bought at the peak watch their investments evaporate. But Trevor Milton doesn't immediately retreat. He goes on the offensive, calling the report false, threatening legal action, rallying his supporters on social media. For a moment, it is unclear who to believe: the short seller with a profit motive or the founder defending his company. But the Hindenburg report has done something irreversible. It's asked questions that can't be unasked, shone light into corners that can't be darkened again. Other journalists begin investigating. Former employees feel emboldened to speak. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice open investigations. And slowly, methodically, the entire structure of deception begins to collapse under the weight of scrutiny. Within days, Trevor Milton resigns. As executive chairman, the company he built, the empire that bore his ambition and his lies, ejects him to save itself. General Motors renegotiates its partnership into something far more limited. Orders are cancelled or reevaluated. The market starts treating Nikola not as the next Tesla, but as the next Tyrannos, another cautionary tale about charismatic founders and the investors who believed them. The comparison to Elizabeth Holmes and her blood-testing fraud becomes inescapable. Two stories of Silicon Valley magical thinking, taken to criminal extremes. The federal investigation grinds forward with the inexorable patience of justice. Prosecutors build their case, interviewing witnesses, collecting documents, tracing the architecture of the fraud. In July 2021, Trevor Milton is indicted on 3 counts of criminal fraud. The government alleges he made false and misleading statements about Nikola's technology, partnerships, and business prospects to drive up the stock price while he sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of his own shares. This is the key. Milton wasn't just lying to build a company, he was lying to enrich himself, converting investor faith into personal wealth before the truth could catch up. The trial, when it finally happens in 2022, is a masterclass in how fraud prosecutions work. The government doesn't need to prove Milton intended to fail or that he didn't believe his own hype. They need to prove he knowingly made false statements that influenced investors. And the evidence is overwhelming. There are text messages showing Milton knew the technology wasn't ready. There are depositions from engineers who warned him. There's the video itself, the truck rolling downhill. And there's no innocent explanation for why the company never clarified what viewers were actually seeing. Milton's defense tries to argue that he was just being optimistic, that entrepreneurs are supposed to be visionary, that the line between promotional puffery and fraud is ambiguous. They paint him as a dreamer, prosecuted for dreaming too loudly. But the jury doesn't buy it. On October 14th, those 2022, Trevor Milton is convicted on 3 of 4 fraud counts. The man who once stood atop a $34 billion empire now faces years in federal prison. He's eventually sentenced to 4 years. A relatively light sentence that reflects his cooperation and the fact that nobody died, even though fortunes were destroyed. But the story doesn't end with Milton's conviction because the questions it raises are too large for one courtroom to contain. How did this happen? How did so many sophisticated investors, major corporations, and financial institutions all buy into a company built on demonstrable lies? The easy answer is to blame Trevor Milton, to call him a uniquely talented con artist. And certainly he was. But the harder truth is that he succeeded because the system wanted him to succeed, at least temporarily. The venture capital and startup ecosystem has created a culture where founders are expected to oversell, where fake it till you make it is a mantra, not a warning. Investors know that most startups exaggerate their progress, overstate their capabilities, and promise timelines they won't meet. This is baked into the model. The assumption is that passionate founders will eventually deliver something valuable, even if it's not exactly what they initially promised. But this tolerance for deception creates a gradient with no clear line between acceptable exaggeration and fraud. Trevor Milton just ran all the way down that gradient until he fell off the edge into criminality. There's also the problem of FOMO, fear of missing out, which dominated investing in the late 2010s. Every investor watched Tesla turn early believers into millionaires and was desperate not to miss the next one. This created an environment where skepticism was punished and credulity was rewarded, at least until it wasn't. Nobody wanted to be the analyst who killed the deal or the fund manager who passed on the next trillion-dollar company. So they suspended disbelief, ignored red flags, and convinced themselves that due diligence would somehow interrupt the momentum. And then there's the media ecosystem that amplifies these narratives. Business journalists face pressure to generate clicks and views. And nothing drives engagement like a compelling founder with a world-changing vision. Stories about incremental progress don't trend on social media. Stories about revolutionaries do. So the press became part of the hype machine, often uncritically repeating company claims, platforming charismatic CEOs, contributing to the bubble. It's not conspiracy, it's incentive alignment. Everyone profits from the story until the story collapses. Nikola Motors still exists, though diminished and chased. The company has tried to rebuild credibility under new leadership to actually deliver on some version of the hydrogen truck vision. But it's racing against bankruptcy and irrelevance, trying to overcome the catastrophic loss of trust that comes from being exposed as fraudulent. Some investors still hold their shares, either out of hope or inability to accept their losses. Others have filed lawsuits, trying to recover something from the wreckage. The broader electric vehicle industry has been scarred by the scandal. Legitimate companies working on difficult technology now face heightened skepticism, must work harder to prove their claims, suffer from the association with Nikola's fraud. This is the tragedy of deception. It doesn't just hurt the people directly deceived. It poisons the well for everyone trying to do honest work in the same space. Trust, once broken at scale, becomes almost impossible to restore. Trevor Milton, for his part, maintains that he was unfairly targeted, that he believed in the technology, that he was a founder whose optimism was criminalized. But belief doesn't excuse deception. Intention doesn't erase harm. He asked people to trust him with their money, their futures, their hope for a cleaner world, and he betrayed that trust for personal gain. The severity of his crime isn't measured in violence, but in the systematic destruction of faith, the conversion of public optimism into private wealth. What remains after the dust settles is a question that America keeps asking itself, but never quite answers. How do we build the future without being conned by people claiming to have already built it? How do we encourage innovation without creating playgrounds for fraudsters? How do we maintain healthy skepticism without crushing legitimate dreams? These aren't abstract questions. They read the live wires, running through an economy increasingly dependent on betting on unproven technologies and charismatic founders. The Nikola Motors scandal should have been a lesson about the dangers of hype-driven capitalism, about the need for verification before valuation, about the importance of substance over story. But the uncomfortable truth is that the incentives that enabled Trevor Milton's fraud haven't changed. There are still SPACs taking companies public with minimal oversight. There are still founders making extraordinary claims about breakthrough technologies. There are still investors desperate for the next big thing, willing to overlook red flags in pursuit of returns. The machinery that produced Nikola's $34 billion illusion is still running, still minting new promises, still asking us to believe. And perhaps that's the darkest lesson of all. We learned nothing. Or at least not enough, because learning would require changing, would require admitting that the game itself is broken, that the modern startup ecosystem often rewards deception and punishes prudence. It would require investors to accept lower returns in exchange for honesty, media to choose accuracy over engagement, founders to promise only what they can deliver. It would require rebuilding trust from the foundation up, slowly, painfully, honestly. But that's hard. It's so much easier to find the next Trevor Milton, the next company promising to change everything, the next opportunity to get rich on someone else's vision. So we do. We keep believing because the alternative, accepting that miracles are rare and progress is slow, feels like giving up. We tell ourselves this time will be different, that we've learned to spot the frauds, that the next truck rolling down the hill is actually driving, until gravity reminds us otherwise, until the momentum runs out and the illusion comes to rest, silent and still, exactly where physics always said it would, and we're left standing in the desert, watching billions of dollars evaporate like morning mist, wondering how we fell for it again, knowing, even as we wonder, that somewhere, someone is already filming the next demo, building the next empire on the next lie, betting that our capacity for hope will always exceed our memory for pain. The truck was never driving. It was always just falling. We just chose to see it differently. And that choice, repeated across millions of investors and dozens of companies, is both the engine of innovation and the architecture of fraud. The question isn't whether we'll be fooled again. It's whether we'll recognize it before we've already lost everything. Before the gravity of deception pulls us all downhill, toward an ending we could have seen coming, if we'd only been willing to look.